Some men don't die alone because no one loved them. They die alone because, over decades, they quietly built a life no one could enter. They thought they were being strong, independent, self-sufficient, but without noticing, strength turned into distance, and distance turned into isolation. This doesn't happen suddenly. It happens slowly, one choice at a time, one wall at a time, until one day, connection feels foreign and loneliness feels permanent. The most dangerous part? Most men who end up alone never see it coming. They think they're doing everything right. So here's the real question. What if the very traits you're proud of are the ones quietly pushing everyone away? What if independence isn't freedom, but armor? What if achievement is costing you connection? What if the way you protect yourself today is shaping how you'll end tomorrow? Because there are patterns, subtle, respected, even praised, that almost guarantee a man ends his life alone. And if you can see them now, you still have time to break them. This channel is for the man who stayed strong when no one noticed, the man who carried responsibility quietly and slowly disappeared. Here, strength is questioned, silence is exposed, and the cost of being the strong one is finally spoken out loud. There are men who end their lives surrounded by people who love them, and there are men who die alone. Not because they were unlucky, not because the world was cruel, but because they spent decades building patterns that guaranteed isolation. And the tragic part is, most of them never saw it coming. They thought they were being strong, independent, or self-sufficient. They didn't realize they were building walls so high that eventually no one could reach them anymore. And by the time they noticed, the patterns were so deeply embedded that breaking them felt impossible. This isn't about fear, it's about awareness.
Because if you can see these patterns in yourself now, you can change them before they calcify into your destiny. Let me show you the 6 patterns that lead men to die alone, and more importantly, what to do if you recognize them in yourself. Pattern 1. He mistakes isolation for independence. There's a version of masculinity that glorifies being alone. The lone wolf, the self-made man, the guy who needs nothing from anyone. And on the surface, it looks like strength, like freedom, like power. But underneath it, it's just fear dressed up as philosophy. This man doesn't ask for help because he's convinced that needing people is weakness. He doesn't share his struggles because vulnerability feels like failure. He doesn't build deep relationships because intimacy requires admitting you're not completely self-sufficient. So he tells himself he's independent, when really he's just terrified of being seen. And for a while it works. He builds a career, achieves goals, proves he can survive alone. But survival isn't living, and independence without connection isn't freedom. It's just sophisticated isolation. And by the time he realizes that, he's in his 50s or 60s, and he's forgotten how to let people in. The distinction is simple. Independence is choosing to stand on your own when you need to. Isolation is being unable to lean on anyone when you need to. One is strength, the other is armor that became a cage. If you're telling yourself you don't need anyone, ask yourself honestly, is that freedom or is that fear? Because the man who genuinely doesn't need anyone still chooses connection. The man who's terrified of needing anyone avoids it and calls that strength. Pattern 2. He never learned emotional literacy. This man feels everything but understands nothing. Anger, sadness, fear, loneliness, they all register as the same vague discomfort that he either ignores or medicates with work, alcohol, or distraction.
He doesn't know how to name what he's feeling, so he can't communicate it, and people around him are left guessing. His partner asks what's wrong, and he says, "I'm fine," because he genuinely doesn't have the language to explain that he's overwhelmed, scared, or feeling disconnected. His friends notice he's distant, and he doesn't know how to say, "I'm struggling," without feeling like he's burdening them. So he stays silent, and the distance grows. Emotional literacy isn't about being soft, it's about being precise. It's the difference between saying, "I feel bad," and saying, "I feel anxious about this specific thing, and I need support in this specific way." And men who can't make that distinction end up isolated, not because people don't care, but because people don't know how to help someone who can't articulate what they need. This pattern doesn't just affect relationships, it affects every aspect of life. You can't solve a problem you can't name. You can't ask for what you need if you don't know what you need. and you can't build intimacy if you can't communicate your internal experience. If you find yourself saying, "I'm fine," when you're not, if you shut down when emotions get intense, if you avoid conversations about feelings because you don't know what to say, you're building this pattern, and it will isolate you more effectively than any external circumstance. Pattern 3. He treats relationships like transactions. This man doesn't connect, he negotiates. Every relationship is evaluated based on what he gets versus what he gives. He helps people, but keeps score. He shows up, but expects reciprocation. He's there for others, but only if they prove they deserve it. And on some level, this makes sense. You don't want to be used. You don't want to give endlessly without receiving. You want balance. But real intimacy doesn't operate on ledgers. Love isn't commerce. And the moment you start tallying who did what for whom, you've turned connection into contract.
This man has acquaintances, colleagues, people who benefit from knowing him. But he doesn't have friends, not real ones. Because friendship requires giving without keeping score, showing up without guarantee of return, and loving people even when the transaction isn't balanced. And he can't do that because his entire relational framework is built on exchange. So when he needs someone, when life gets hard and he's the one requiring support, people show up out of obligation, but not out of love. Because he never built relationships based on genuine care. He built them based on mutual benefit. And when the benefit disappears, so do the people. If you find yourself thinking, "I did this for them, so they should do this for me," if you feel resentful when your effort isn't matched, if you evaluate relationships based on ROI, you're in this pattern, and it will leave you surrounded by people who owe you, but don't actually love you. Pattern 4. He refuses to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is not weakness, but this man treats it like it is. He never admits when he's struggling, never asks for help, never shows the parts of himself that aren't strong, capable, or in control. And he thinks this makes him reliable, respectable, someone people can count on. But what it actually does is make him unknowable. People can admire him, depend on him, even appreciate him, but they can't love him because they don't know him. They only know the version of him that never needs anything. And that version isn't human, it's a function. Real connection happens in vulnerability. When you let someone see you scared and they don't leave. When you admit you're struggling and they support you. When you show your imperfection and they accept you anyway. That's when bond forms. But this man never allows that. He stays behind the wall of competence and wonders why no one feels close to him. And the cruelest part is, by the time he's ready to be vulnerable, he doesn't know how.
Decades of performance have made authenticity feel foreign. So even when he wants to let people in, he doesn't have the skills to do it. And people interpret his inability to be vulnerable as not wanting connection, so they stop trying. If you've built an identity around never needing help, never showing weakness, never being anything less than strong, you're building this pattern. And it will make you respected but unloved, admired but alone. Pattern 5. He prioritizes achievement over relationship. This man measures his life in accomplishments, career milestones, financial goals, status markers. And relationships, if they exist at all, are secondary. They fit into the gaps between ambition. They're nice to have, but not essential. There's something he'll focus on later, after he's successful. But later never comes, because there's always another goal, another level, another achievement that feels more urgent than connection. So he postpones intimacy, delays vulnerability, puts relationships on hold while he builds his empire. And by the time he looks up from the grind, everyone's moved on. The people who wanted to be close to him got tired of being deprioritized. The relationships that could have deepened stayed shallow because he never invested the time. And now he's successful by every external measure and completely alone by every internal one. Here's what this man doesn't understand. Relationships don't wait. People don't pause their lives while you focus on your career. And you can't build intimacy later with time you didn't invest now. Connection requires presence, and if you're not present, connection doesn't form. If you tell yourself, "I'll focus on relationships after I achieve this," if you cancel plans for work more than you keep them, if your most important relationships are always getting your leftover energy, you're in this pattern, and it will give you everything except what actually matters. Pattern 6, he never forgives.
This man holds grudges like achievements. Every betrayal, every disappointment, every time someone let him down gets cataloged and stored. And he tells himself this is wisdom, this is protecting himself.
This is learning from experience. But really, it's just slowly cutting himself off from everyone. Because people make mistakes, relationships involve hurt, and nobody shows up perfectly all the time. And if you can't forgive imperfection, if you can't move past disappointment, if every error becomes permanent evidence of unworthiness, you end up alone. Not because everyone's terrible, but because your standard is impossible. This man has reasons for every severed relationship. They betrayed him, they disappointed him, they didn't show up the way they should have. And all of those reasons might be valid, but the cumulative effect is isolation. And at some point he has to ask himself, is being right worth being alone? Forgiveness isn't about letting people treat you badly. It's about releasing the weight of resentment so it doesn't crush your capacity for connection. It's about understanding that flawed people are the only kind that exist. And if you can't love imperfect humans, you can't love anyone. If you have a list of people who wronged you and you'll never speak to again, if you cut people off permanently for single mistakes, if you can't let go of past hurt, you're in this pattern. And it will make you righteous but alone, justified but isolated. These 6 patterns don't happen overnight. They build slowly over years, decades even. And most men who end up alone never meant to. They just made small choices every day that prioritized safety over connection, control over vulnerability, achievement over relationship. And by the time they realized what they'd built, the patterns were so ingrained that reversing them felt impossible. So they told themselves they preferred being alone, that they didn't need anyone, that isolation was a choice.
But late at night when the performance stopped, they knew the truth. They were terrified of dying alone and had no idea how to change course. If you see yourself in any of these patterns, hear this. You're not broken, you're not too far gone, and it's not too late. But you have to choose differently starting now. You have to build the skills you never learned, break the habits that isolate you, and risk the vulnerability that connection requires. You have to stop calling isolation independence and start building real relationships. You have to learn emotional literacy so you can communicate what you actually need. You have to stop treating people like transactions and start loving without scorekeeping. You have to let yourself be seen, imperfect and struggling, and trust that the right people will stay. You have to prioritize connection with the same energy you prioritize achievement. And you have to forgive, not because people